So, have you ever looked at one of those huge construction projects in New York City, new tower going up, maybe a big apartment building, or even work on the subway, and just thought, why? Why does building here seem to cost, just a crazy amount more than doing the exact same thing, say, right across the river in Jersey or up in Connecticut?
It's a really good question. And it is a massive difference.
Yes.
It persists and it goes way beyond just the usual suspects like land value or basic labor costs.
Right.
And actually, according to a pretty big coalition, we're talking major New York businesses, insurers, construction groups, a big chunk of that answer might be down to, well, organized criminal schemes specifically set up to prey on the construction industry here.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into these really unusual, very strategic letters. They were sent by this broad industry coalition think groups like the Real Estate Board of New York, the Associated General Contractors, sent directly to the U.S. attorneys, both for the Eastern District, EDNY, and the Southern District, SDNY.
Yeah, and these aren't just like general complaints filed away somewhere. They read as urgent pleas, highly detailed. They're asking federal law enforcement, basically, to make investigating these alleged schemes a top priority. Schemes, they say, involve staging or totally faking construction accidents for huge organized profits.
Okay, so our goal for you listening is pretty straightforward then. We need to unpack what this coalition is actually claiming.
Exactly. We'll look at how they say this scheme works, and it sounds, frankly, very sophisticated. We need to understand the economic damage, which, as we'll see, goes way beyond just the construction site itself. And maybe most importantly, the very specific, powerful law enforcement strategy the industry wants the U.S. attorneys to use to shut these things down.
All right, let's get into the anatomy of this alleged conspiracy. The language they use in these letters, it's really blunt, no pulling punches. They call it a coordinated, profit-driven conspiracy, and they allege it involves organized crime, fabricated falls, and invasive and unnecessary medical procedures.
Yeah, what's really striking is how they describe the mechanics. It isn't just random or opportunistic fraud, apparently. It seems highly structured to leverage a very specific weakness or feature, depending on how you look at it, in New York civil law. That's how they aim to maximize the payout.
So the coalition claims these rings are built specifically to inflate damages. And they do this by exploiting these absolute liability provisions under New York Labor Law 240241. This targets the contractors and the property owners.
Exactly.
Okay, maybe just quickly, for anyone not deep in construction law, what does absolute liability actually mean here?
Well, put simply, the law often means the worker doesn't have to prove fault in certain types of accidents, particularly falls from height or, gravity-related incidents.
Ah, okay.
So if you fall off scaffolding, say, or a ladder, the liability often falls squarely, absolutely, on the contractor or the owner. It doesn't really matter what other factors might have contributed.
Got it.
And the coalition alleges these rings are exploiting that legal setup, which pretty much guarantees some kind of payout by maybe faking the accidents entirely, or at least exaggerating the severity of ones they stage.
So they found this legal leverage point, the absolute liability, and the numbers that are being thrown around suggest that, well, maybe this exploitation became pretty systemic once they figured it out. We've got some data points here in the sources that really paint a picture of the scale. Like one New York insurer, they've already filed a federal lawsuit,
Right.
And they're alleging a statewide pattern. Think about that. More than 1,000 suspected fraudulent workers' comp claims just over a 4-year period.
1,000 cases statewide. That volume alone is pretty staggering. But there's actually an even sharper detail in the source materials about the legal pipeline that seems to be processing these claims.
Okay.
Well, investigative reporting, which the letters cite, apparently highlighted one prominent NYC personal injury firm that's actually trying to withdraw from. Get this, 250 to 300 construction injury cases.
Wait, 250 to 300 cases? From one firm?
Yeah, and the reason cited in court was ethical concerns about a referral source.
Wow. Okay, that's alarming. It suggests the problem isn't just individual fraudulent claims, but maybe the whole intake process, the referrals into the legal system, might be compromised, not just random accidents happening.
Precisely. That's the implication. And the coalition says they have evidence pointing towards that kind of organization. The letters specifically mention investigations turning up clusters of construction injury lawsuits, all originating from the same residential addresses.
Multiple lawsuits, same address.
Right. which, as they point out, strongly suggests organized referrals or fake claims.
Mm.
It points to a structured network, kind of funneling claimants through the system to exploit that absolute liability law.
Okay, so this brings us to the so what question for you, the listener. Whether you're in the construction business or maybe just someone trying to rent an apartment or dealing with infrastructure projects, this seems to move pretty quickly from being just an alleged insurance fraud issue to something that could be a real drag on the public and the economy.
Absolutely. If you connect the dots to the bigger picture, the impact seems really clear in just the raw cost of building things here. The industry data the coalition uses is pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
Insurance costs for big New York projects, they say they've spiked to over 14% of the total project value.
14% just for insurance.
For 14, yeah.
Ah.
And they expect it to go higher. Now, compare that to nearby states Jersey, Connecticut, where similar project insurance rates are apparently hovering around 2.5%.
14% versus 2.5%. That's a massive difference. It puts New York at a huge competitive disadvantage, doesn't it?
It does.
But, I mean, how much of that 14% could just be, regular inflation or the fact that legitimate union labor is expensive in New York City? How much is that versus this alleged fraud? Did the sources break that down?
Well, they argue that while, yes, labor is high, cost of living is high, that enormous gap, the extra 11.5 percentage points, basically they attribute that primarily to the exploitation of the liability law. They're saying the insurance market is pricing in a risk that's being artificially manufactured by these alleged organized schemes.
Mm-hmm.
And that cost difference, well, it has to go somewhere.
And the coalition is pretty clear about where it goes, right? They spell out the ripple effects. That huge cost difference leads straight to higher bids for projects, major delays, or sometimes projects just get canceled entirely. Housing, infrastructure, everything.
Exactly. Which means fewer housing units actually get built, plain and simple. And for the ones that do get built, those higher insurance and construction costs, they get baked right into the final price. Higher rents, higher carrying costs.
So it ultimately hits affordability and makes the region less competitive overall. This alleged criminal activity could have a real measurable impact on just the average person trying to live or work here.
That's the argument they're making very forcefully.
Okay, so we see the alleged problem, the scale, the economic fallout. Now, let's talk about the solution they're proposing, because the legal requests here, this is what really makes this feel different, more strategic than just, filing a complaint. The coalition clearly thinks the civil system isn't enough, maybe because that absolute liability law works against defendants. So they sent identical, very detailed strategic requests to both U.S. attorneys, EDNY, and SDNY.
Right. That coordinated approach itself is significant. It shows they view this as a multi-borough organized crime issue. And they're pushing for the U.S. attorneys to bring out the big guns of federal law. They specifically asked for the use of racketeering charges. R-key, that's the statute designed to dismantle ongoing systemic organized crime.
RQ, wow, okay.
Plus mail and wire fraud, healthcare fraud theories. The target isn't just individual fake claims, it's the whole coordinated network. The legal side, the medical side, the referral sources.
And they want specific focus on identity misuse and also these invasive, unnecessary medical procedures that are apparently used just to inflate the damage claims, turning a maybe minor, possibly staged fall into a huge lawsuit.
That's right. It's a sophisticated request, really, moving beyond just single fraud cases to attacking the conspiracy structure. And crucially, they also ask for formal interagency cooperation.
Ah, okay. That's where that list of agencies comes in. They want joint task forces, EDNY, SDNY with the FBI, sure. But they also suggest bringing in DHS, HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, DOL, OIG, the Labor Department's Inspector General, and even the Postal Service's OIG. Why that specific mix? Why Homeland Security or the Post Office?
Well, it seems because the alleged scheme has multiple fraud layers. You've got potential financial crimes, maybe identity theft or misuse, benefits fraud, all possibly connected. So bringing in DHS, HSI could address identity issues. DLOIG can track fraud in benefits programs that might intersect with these claims. USPS OIG often gets involved in mail fraud aspects. It's about hitting the network from all possible angles simultaneously.
It sounds like they recognize this needs a digital investigation strategy just as much as, pounding the pavement. The coalition specifically asked law enforcement to use data-driven subpoenas to basically aggregate patterns across different insurance carriers, different defense lawyers,
Right.
asking the government to connect the dots using data.
Precisely. Find the connective tissue. Don't just fight fires one claim at a time. They want the feds to look for those familiar referral sources, the repeated imaging surgical vendors, and especially those clusters of claims tied back to the same addresses we mentioned earlier. The data, they argue, will expose the underlying network.
And the absolute core of it seems to be disrupting the money, right? They asked for prioritizing forfeiture and restitution, tracing the money through the entire system.
Yeah, follow the money, litigation funding, marketing operations, medical billing, track it all. Seize the proceeds. That's the request. And they really emphasize that EDNY and SDNY need to coordinate if rings overlap boroughs to maximize the disruption across the whole metro area.
It also sounds like the industry isn't just asking for help, they're offering it too.
Yes, they offered significant support, facilitating introductions to data sources the industry holds, briefing the U.S. attorneys on the prevention measures they're already trying, like better site video protocols and rapid notification pathways when something suspicious happens on site.
Okay, so it's a major push for federal criminal investigation. But to show this isn't happening in a vacuum, the letters also mention that things are happening on the state regulatory side too, specifically within the workers' compensation system.
That's right. The NYS Workers' Compensation Board, the WCB, has faced criticism in the past, sure. But the source materials here actually give specific, detailed examples of actions they've taken recently against medical providers. It shows there are parallel efforts trying to clean up the medical pipeline involved in these claims.
Interesting. What stands out when you look at those regulatory actions? Is there a pattern?
Well, first, just the number of providers who've either been forced to withdraw or who voluntarily resign their authorization to treat workers' comp patients. That's significant volume. But what's really insightful, I think, is the type of withdrawal or resignation in some cases.
Oh, so.
Some providers resigned completely from the WC system,
Okay.
but others resigned only from performing independent medical examinations, IMEs. They can still treat patients, just not perform these specific exams.
And why is that distinction between full resignation and IME-only resignation so important?
Because the IME is often the crucial point in litigation. That's the exam used to assess the injury severity for the lawsuit, to determine the damages. By focusing on removing providers specifically from doing IMEs, it suggests the WCB might be strategically targeting the very point in the process where damages could be artificially inflated or engineered for the lawsuit. Not just general treatment, but the assessment itself.
So the state regulators seem to be zeroing in on the mechanism for potentially inflating claims, complementing the federal push on the alleged criminal organization.
It looks that way, yes. The WCB actions seem focused on specific alleged misconduct related to claim assessment and removing those providers' ability to participate in that key function.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've taken a deep dive into this urgent demand from a really broad coalition of New York construction, real estate, and insurance players. They're calling for a full-scale federal criminal response using tools like ARCO to what they see as a systemic organized crime problem. A problem, they say, connects shady legal tactics, unnecessary medical procedures, and potentially organized crime figures, all driving up costs that affect everyone from construction workers to people just trying to rent an apartment.
Absolutely. The source materials really lay out a case for how loopholes, or maybe specific features, of civil liability laws like New York Labor Law 240241 can allegedly become the target for these very sophisticated, multi-layered criminal fraud schemes. Schemes that seem to have major economic consequences that ripple far beyond the actual construction site. This isn't just about insurance fraud in the typical sense. It's presented as racketeering that actively harms the region's affordability and its ability to compete.
Which really leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Considering these detailed requests for law enforcement to use financial tools, data mining, forfeiture, and given that the industry itself offered to step up evidence collection with things like site video, what level of responsibility should general contractors and insurers themselves hold? How much should they be expected to proactively preserve and organize digital evidence like those detailed video logs, or meticulous subcontractor rosters to actually help deter and prosecute these kinds of complex white-collar crime networks before they get so entrenched?